Several lawsuits have also been filed in connection with that deadly Irving charter bus crash that killed 3 and injured 40 other passengers. Talk about how many more lawsuits we can expect and what their outcomes could be. We turn to local attorney Doug Uloff. Good morning, Doug.
Good morning.
What sort of settlements do you think will come out of these lawsuits?
It's difficult to predict at this point. A lot of it will be dependent on how much insurance is present in both cases and what the level of exposure of each of the defendants is to damages. In looking at the plant explosion in West, the total valuation of the property owned by the company that is now actually destroyed appeared to me from the appraisal district records to be less than $2 million. Similarly, the bus crash, the company appeared to own 10 buses. Many of those may be subject to claims of banks or lenders who finance them. So what the asset pool would be for people suing them is difficult to say at this point.
Can companies like West Fertilizer and Cardinal Coach, which are relatively small companies, survive all these lawsuits?
Frequently not. And in some cases, there have been, particularly in the instance of the bus crash some years ago, and there was a insurance policy of $5 million, which is required by the state in the case of a bus company, and they simply filed bankruptcy and tendered the policy into the bankruptcy court and left it up to the court to distribute.
How come we haven't heard from the West Fertilizer Company? I mean, they have remained silent through this whole thing. We haven't heard one word from them.
It's also difficult to say, and that to some extent depends on, I think, an individual's experience in dealing with this type of situation, which virtually no one has. A small company like this, I'm sure the owners are themselves in shock, probably don't really know quite how to respond. They're certainly likely to be accused of any number of potentially even criminal conduct, and they probably don't want to say anything that will put them at greater risk at this point, which is not necessarily the correct thing to do.
We've seen several lawsuits filed in the West Fertilizer Company blast already. I expect there will be many more to come. Can we expect a class action lawsuit status?
I think it's difficult to say in the West. A class action is dependent on the degree to which the harm suffered by the individuals forming the basis of the class is the same, and that certainly everyone seems to be harmed by the explosion, but the nature of the damage is going to be different. And Texas is not exactly enthusiastic about class action, so what actually might be more likely is what is sometimes called a mass action, where these suits that are being filed now, I believe, as you said, there's 6. There might even have been a 7th yesterday. They will likely, in my opinion, be consolidated for at least the liability part, since they're spread right now across 3 of the 5 district courts in the county, McClellan County. It's likely that they'll be sort of consolidated for purposes of determining what happened and who's liable, and perhaps damages being determined separately. So I think mass action rather than class is more likely.
Do you think the city of West itself will actually sue the company?
That would not surprise me. I think that the city of West itself appears to have suffered damage, probably to some of the buildings that it owns, and so it likely would be a plaintiff in this case as well.
All right, Doug, thanks so much for your insight this morning. Attorney Doug Uloff talking about the lawsuits that have been filed so far in the West Fertilizer Company blast and the lawsuits already filed in the Irving charter bus crash as well.